Data fans! I had a 3-day weekend, so I decided to spend it speed learning 8 different Python web app libraries to build this basic interactive dashboard. Now in this video, I'll rank my 2-hour experience with each of those libraries. And obviously, with 2 hours of work per library, I didn't get to test all of the best practices or community plugins around it, so take this pseudo rank by taste with a grain of salt. All of the source code is available below in the description to try for yourself, and if you want me to do a deep dive in one of those libraries, let me know in the comments below. Now let me show you what the dashboard looks like. This dashboard is pretty reactive. Here there's a little widget where I can put my name, Fanil, and it will update. At the right, you'll see my Hello Fanil, and I can now change the name to Hello Banana, and I get the Hello Banana on the right. Or I can select a period or a content type here, like January to June 2025, all of the shows that appear on Netflix. It will update all of the cards, the plotly chart, and the data table at the end with all of the shows from this period. So I can change it again. I want to see the movies because I'm more used to movies. And you can see it's not too jumpy. There are little loading spinners, that's very cute. It's very straightforward. This uses Gradio, the Hugging Face library, to build web apps. And honestly, this ranking is BS because that Gradio should not be last. Let me show you why. To start building my Gradio app, I stack multiple rows here inside a main blocks container that is called demo. This creates a list of context managers in which I can put widgets so that they're displayed horizontally in the app. For example, let me go back to this title row. There's a Markdown movie analytics dashboard that appears here. And then for the greeting row, there's a text box and an HTML, which appears here, my text box, and my HTML, which is this part. You can resize those widgets through a scale argument here. You've got my scale 2, which means that this text input here will have twice the scale or twice the width of this Hello Banana HTML greeting output. Or you can see the similar example. If I go further down in the filters row, you've got this drop down here, which is this drop down, and you've got this radio item, which is this radio item. And because I've got a scale of 2 for this drop down, well, this drop down will also have twice the width of this radio item. So they will be kind of aligned at this point. There are other high-level layout arguments. I don't clearly remember them. Maybe there was an align items or something. But you're also free to add your own CSS classes. Like what I did for those 3 cards here, movies, views, and hours watched cards. In the card row, I created 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, a count card, use card, and hours card. And each of those cards has got a CSS name of card that I can target with CSS later on. And then in each card, like this count card with the movies one, I've got a first markdown with a CSS name of card title and another markdown with a CSS name of card value, which is this is my card title and this is my card value. And now I can target them from a global CSS variable that is applied inside my Gradio blocks. Now in this CSS, I can target my card and my card value. So with my card, I put a padding, which is the space here. This is my padding space between the content and the border. I've got the border and the border radius, so I can change my border radius to 48 pixels. And now you've got a very ugly round card. That's why you shouldn't give me any of those designer things. But anyway, let's go back to 12 pixels. There's even a theming option in Gradio, which exposes a lot of the CSS variables from the primary color to the shadow for each button. And you can even inject your own custom JavaScript. Now, don't worry, you don't have to use JavaScript to bind the variable of this widget potato to the value of this widget on the right, because Gradio's reactivity works for event listeners. I saw multiple ways of setting up event listeners in Gradio, but I eventually settled on this one, the Gradio on decorator. Now, the way it works is you create a callback. Here it's going to be greet name, and you decorate it with Gradio on which you set a number of triggers. For example, I will trigger this function anytime the name input, which is this text box here, anytime this text input changes value, I call greet name. Every widget has multiple event listeners. You can have the change or the input or the focus event. You should check the Gradio documentation to see all of those. And then you write down the array of inputs. For example, I want my name input value to be an argument of the function, and I want a list of outputs as the list of return values from the method. So here my greet name is going to be, if there's no name, return provide your name. So let me remove the name, provide your name. And then if there's a name, return hello Fanil or hello a name. So I can put Esmeralda, and you can almost see the kind of update here anytime I change the value of my text box. I did it for every widget that I wanted to update. So coming, for example, to this filter rows, I define a selected period dropdown and a selected content type radio item. And both of them I link later to update the cards, like this hours card, for example. If I want to update it, I grab the num hours output markdown, which is this, and I will go to my update hours card, which is triggered by a selected period change, this drop down here, or a selected content type, which is this radio item. And this is triggered, it will take as input the selected period and content type, and output the number of hours watched that I get from an alternative function from my own library. This even works for Plotly. I've built Plotly figure in which I immediately send the Plotly figure or a pandas data frame as output. Now, I'm sad there is no event listener for Plotly selection. Like here, if I select dots from the chart, I'd love to only filter those titles from this data frame. I couldn't do it in 2 hours. You could create your own Gradio Svelte component to do it, but I just didn't have the motivation to set up a Svelte environment in 2 hours. So yeah, actually I find Gradio awesome. It's jam-packed with features like streaming AI, one-line deployment of Hugging Face models, or give the ability to the users to flag predictions or data as right or wrong, or MCP server capabilities. And you know, it's Hugging Face, so it evolves at a very fast pace, and the community is huge. Those features are great for AI dashboards, so I think in this use case, Gradio is a little underutilized because I'm not using those Gradio AI features. Now, if you already use Gradio, yeah, you know you can easily display your AI KPIs like accuracy or recall in this type of dashboard. It's easy to visualize the dataset at the end, but personally, where I think Gradio shines like a diamond is when I need to load any of the 2 million Hugging Face models into a multimodal GenAI demo. For that, Gradio is the best. What does it look like when I've got native Plotly events? Here's another dashboard, still with the reactive hello Fanil, Fanico name, hello Fanico, or movie is still very reactive. And the updates from the dropdowns, I mean, no loading, no jumping, it all looks seamless. I'm like, yeah, very nice. And this data frame at the end, you can filter, you can sort by title. It's paginated at the end here. And oh, there's even a debug tool. You can, and it's nice. You have a debug UI where I can show you how everything is connected all together to handle reactivity. I didn't know this. And I forgot the best part, because here there are too many pages, but I can select, I want to see the Squid Game movies from 2025. Here, I think there's, no, Squid Game is a show. So here, the Squid Game, if I want to see Squid Game appear only, I can grab my box select and only select the Squid Game part. And now I only see the Squid Game free from this box select. Then I mean that's the Plotly performance I expect from the dashboard library of Plotly Dash. Let's look at some Dash code. Now I've got my app layout with a stack of rows, title row, greeting rows, and etc. as an array of children. Those are not context managers like the Gradio example from before. Now let me go to this greeting row or title row. Dash provides you with bare bones HTML and components, like this div with an input text box, which is this movie, and this div of greeting, which is this part here. You can style them inline. There's a styles argument, if I recall correctly, or you can use a CSS style sheet. But I'm a Tailwind person. I like my CSS utility classes, so I prefer loading Tailwind from an external script defined here at the top. External script, I've got my Tailwind here. And now that I've got Tailwind, I know I can inject my CSS classes like font bold text for Excel to make this a beautiful title, or manage all of the flexbox capabilities using Tailwind here. I find there's a lot of styling to do when you're building a Dash app. And I know there are other component libraries like Dash Bootstrap and Dash Munstein, which provide you with better looking components, I'd dare say. It just wasn't clear for me if I was supposed to use them as a first timer or if I need to wait a little later to use them. But overall, Dash has you manipulate the full HTML and CSS more than letting you explore the data as you go. Notice how I put IDs into almost every component. Like this text input has got an ID of name, and this div here has got an ID of greeting. Well, that is because, like Gradio, Dash works with event listeners. Going back to my greeting example, I've got my greet name here, decorated by a callback method with an input and an output. The input here listens to the property of a component, like the value here of the component, which has the ID of name. And then this input becomes this name here, and then you link it to the children here of the div from ID greeting. So you've got your component's name, it's this one here, which is this one. Whoa. And then you've got your greeting ID, which is this HTML div, which is going to be this HTML div. And then in your callback, you return enter name as a children for the div if there's no name. Otherwise, you return hello movie or hello Spider-Man. So here's the same example for the filters rows. You've got a drop down for a selected period and radio items for a selected content type with the flex 2 and flex 1 to define that this is twice the size of this. And then I go look for the callbacks with selected periods. I think it's going to be this chart row with an ID of Plotly chart. And here's the callback, build Plotly figure. I build and return a figure, a Plotly figure inside my component ID Plotly chart component property figure. Whenever selected period or selected content type values change. And this is something I really liked with Dash. It looks like any component property can be targeted from this figure to the data and columns of the data frame at the end. So I'm like, maybe I could create even crazier HTML reactive things. I also later learned that you didn't have to provide an ID string like this. You can actually provide, if you give this component a name, like this title component, you can actually provide this as an argument instead of a stringified ID, which makes for easier autocomplete. So I'm a little sad to find this at the bottom of the documentation. Maybe not bottom, but halfway through it. If you know you can visualize your dashboard using only Plotly figures, and if you're good with bare bones, low-level HTML, CSS, then Dash is your perfect match as a low-level Plotly dashboard library. There are a lot of Dash callback patterns I didn't go into. So the way I imagine this is, because it's mostly callbacks, let's quote quotes, it does sound like the browser is doing everything client side. It's doing most of the work and the state management to state this, this reactive. Look, it's like there's no server callback here, even if there is actually. It's almost to the point that I'm not sure that Dash has server-side state management, where I want to share intermediate results from data processing pipelines to multiple clients, to multiple browsers. Because if there is server-side state management, well, I guess it's coming very late in the documentation. Also, Dash, very strong enterprise backup, a very active community. They're still coming with more Plotly features. They're coming with Plotly Studio, Dash Design Kit, I think. Lots of very dashboard-focused capabilities. I mean, one could open a whole new channel about Dash, but there's already another famous YouTuber for Dash, so you should go check him out. Time to check one more library with a powerful event system. First of all, this Python dashboard transforms into Vue.js, and just for that, immediate bonus points for me. Now, as always, there's a reactive name, Vanille, hello Vanille, provide your name, provide no name, salsa du démon. I can select a period, July, December, and you can see, yeah, the Plotly figure a little slower to mount, but still, for me, it's nothing concerning. I mean, it's not a Plotly dedicated framework, so I don't mind. And it does accept Plotly selections. Look at this, up, and all of the data frames are filtered. Though, as I will show you later, I had to use every part of the event system to make this happen. This is NiceGUI, from the people who find Streamlit a little too magic. Just like Gradio, I like a root layout of app as a context manager in which I stack multiple rows, like title row, greeting row, filters rows, etc. And all of those as context managers. So I can again inject my H1 movie analytics dashboard in my title row, and it appears here. And then my greeting row becomes a UI input here, and a greeting UI label, which is here. And one day I will use a pen to draw on this wallboard. NiceGUI has Tailwind classes. As you can see in this root app, I've got my MX Auto container with a padding of 8 pixels on the left and right, and a margin top of 4 pixels at the top. And there's a gap of 8 between each rows from the flexbox. So here I've got 8 pixels, 8 pixels, 8 pixels, 8 pixels, and then 8 pixels. There's even auto-completion for Tailwind. Let me put, for example, here, if I set Tailwind, I can then autocomplete with any Tailwind attribute, which is insane. Wow, I love Tailwind. So this, for me, perfect. But NiceGUI is first and foremost a quasar framework. And I find in some very rare cases, Tailwind classes do conflict with Quasar classes. So I had to, learn Quasar a little bit. But it's very similar to Tailwind. You've got this full width Q, gutter, MD, text H3, text wave bold. It's mostly CSS utility classes. I think there's column 8 because this is a 12 column width app. This will use 8 columns. So because this uses 8 columns, this uses 4 columns. So this is going to be twice the size of this part. And there's still a styles argument, so you can inline your styles if needed be. Now, NiceGUI is the only one with a specific reactivity trick. Let me show you. Going to this name and greeting here, so this name is Fanil. What happens here is you bind the text of the greeting to the value of the name widget. Which means this Fanlo here, when I change it, well, I bind the greeting here to the name, to the value of the name here. And then I apply a backward transformation to transform the hello to a hello name if there's a name, or else provide a name if there's no name. So let's remove the name and it goes back to provide a name. This is a bind text from. There's also a bind text to, so you can send it backwards or you can send the binding forward. But in NiceGUI, you can even do two-way binding with the bind value. So what happens is if you bind two values together, they will both interact with each other. So if I change the value of one widget, it changes the value of another widget, and inversely. So you can have a drop down edited by the value of another radio item and inversely. And for those types of stuff, NiceGUI is like the best framework. In this example, in my filter rows, I have a period input here and a content type input, which is this radio item. I bind those values to a global state at the top. Let me show you this global state with a bindable property. And because this is a class, I could actually build a new property as a transformation of this period and this content type, and bind a widget to this new property, which depends on selected period and selected content type. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm really excited because that means I can bind this widget to this selected period, this to selected content type, and then bind this into a new property to bind this Plotly figure to this new property. And I was like, if that works, I'm so happy. And that's where I got a little disappointed because there's no bind figure from on a Plotly chart. So I've got this Plotly chart here with a UI Plotly, and this Plotly chart has no bind visibility, but you cannot bind figure from state. So I'm like, I'm sad, There are workarounds around this because NiceGUI has a super powerful event system. You can listen, let me scroll down. You can listen to a model value update on the period input and here call a callback from this period input model change to update a figure from the Plotly chart widget and recompute the data frame at the end. You're even able to listen to JavaScript specific Plotly select events. So here, let me go back at the bottom. Here you can listen to JavaScript events, emit the points that you want to manage on the Plotly side to filter the data frame. I mean, this is crazy code. I'm not going to go into this code, but yeah, it's if you're not able to bind into complex objects, you still have a way to send events to widgets to update them. But it doesn't feel as slick as having a bind figure from. That would be, yeah, nice guy, very powerful. With the Quasar framework for advanced styling of components and easy two-way binding, I understand why it's got so many fans on a certain Reddit post about do you have a Streamlit but with better state management. And I only spent 2 hours on Nice Guy, so I'm sure there are ways to build your own bind plotly figure to or bind to any complex objects using this alternative event system. I think I only scratched the surface here. Would 100% recommend it just for trying the two-way binding system. And you know what? I've got another library for you that excels and suffers from the same fates. Here's yet another beautiful reactive dashboard with hello vanille or hello GGGG. You can select a period and it updates the cards and the plotly charts. It's a little jumpy, I find it. Maybe that's because I didn't find how to preserve this plotly widget standing. There's probably a way. And there's plotly selection that works also like this. And then I had to put a button to reset the titles because sometimes when I deselect the selection, it doesn't work. So I can reset the titles here to reset my data frame. I started my career 12, 13 years ago with this dashboard library. do I look that old or anyway? But I started in the R world. So seeing Shiny jump from R to Python, for me it's a little bit like Sonic jumping from Sega to Nintendo. It's very nostalgic, a little unexpected, and it comes with a lot of legacy best practices. And I mean legacy in a good way. Interestingly, Shiny has two syntaxes for apps, Core and Express. And I do want to show you both of them. If you like to have a split backend and frontend, then Shiny Core will shine for you because this is where the UI here is deliberately separate from the server logic here in this function server. Shiny is not the only one using this syntax. There's the number 3 contender uses the same split. Now I will show you Shiny Express because it is a little similar to Gradio. I started with Shiny Express and yet it was very easy to migrate to Shiny Core. So don't stress about choosing the wrong syntax. It's easy to jump from one to another. Now again, you've got this app root, this root flex layouts with a gap of 1 between each element, and this app is a context manager, as always, being a list of vertically stacked rows, title row, greeting row, row debut, I am tired, title row, greeting row, filters row, etc. All of those rows again are context managers with this UI H1, UI input text. Depending on the layout you're using, this layout columns has got native arguments for column widths. So you got this 8 and 4 inside, again, a 12 column wide layout, which means this 8 will be twice the size of this 4. So this period here is going to be twice the size of these radio items. And there will be a gap of 1 rem between the two of them. You're also free to use inline styling with your own flexbox flexible width, or you can even use CSS class names like align items and those are Bootstrap 5 classes, which makes it very easy again to style each of those components or layouts. We have a UI H1 and a UI input text with an ID of name, a little bit like in Dash. And then here you've got a render text, which applies the result of this greeting callback into this text rendering, which is here, LOGGJ. I personally like to think of this as a functional component, which displays the return of the component inside render text to render this. So this render decoration defines the type to output. So for example, this plotly is defined by using this render plotly, and this data frame at the end is using this render data frame with a result of data grids, whereas this plotly is just an plotly IP widget. And then going back to the greeting, this input argument here is bound to this input text by name. Here is the ID of name, and here is the ID of name for the input. This and this are the same. You'll see that the state of any input widget is available from any output component. And anytime this input name changes, it automatically triggers the re-rendering of this output. So here, if I put this is going to change this input name, and this input name triggers the re-rendering of this greeting. I love this transparent reactivity where you don't have event listeners that are pushing updates to components. You declare your output rendering as a function of state, input name, and then this output will re-render when the state input changes. So I just want to put input name everything, like this filter rows. There's an input selected period and selected content type that I use in a card. So when this changes or this changes or this changes, then my card re-renders because it's defined by those three. And the same for this render plotly. It only depends on selected period widget and selected content type widget. So when I change the content type and the period, it re-renders this built plotly figure. Here's a pity, just like NiceGUI, I am crying when there's no way to have the the select plotly here as an input. There's no way to have an input plotly chart selected like this, so that I can use an array of selected buttons inside a functional component output. At least Shiny accepts a plotly figure as an IP widget. So there's a way to call an event plotly selection callback into this plotly IP widget to go and fill a reactive title. And this reactive title here, selected titles, is going to be the inputs here of the data frame preview here. So this final data frame preview depends on period, content type, and selected titles. This is how you can trick Shiny into re-rendering compute data preview when I select a point from plotly. Like NiceGUI, Shiny has unit testing, custom JavaScript component, conditional rendering, but Shiny is one of the libraries with an explicit modularization pattern, because those cards here, if I go and show you the card, it's defined as a Shiny module. So there are more optimizations when you're building multiple Shiny modules or Shiny components and you're linking them all together. Shiny also has GenAI specific chat libraries that have been added recently. And because it's in the POSIT ecosystem, it has Quarto export, it has Cloud Connect, and it has the Python and R communities all together as a bonus. With this data legacy and this way of declaring output components depending on inputs, I find Shiny to be a little easier to reach for as a data analyst. So I personally try to use it when I need a bigger Streamlit dashboard. We like competition, so here's another library with transparent reactivity and ipywidgets. Here, again, at this point, Faniki, I don't know, Faniki updates in real time, no problem. Select a period, select a show, updates immediately. The table at the end also works very nice. I don't know why the Plotly figure is not taking the full width. Apparently, there's a recent integration bug in the new Plotly Any widget. I only spent 2 hours, so I didn't find the solution in 2 hours. But I do have a comment on this one. Solara, honestly, outside of Streamlit, with which I have years of expertise, Solara was the library I was the fastest with for this use case. I built it in almost an hour, I think. It was very easy. I think you're starting to get used to it. As always, you've got your main app, which contains a set of rows, title row, greeting row, filters row, etc. Each of those are context managers, so you can inject a title, an input text, and a markdown in each of those rows. You can do inline styling for the font size or for the flexbox. So why is this free instead of 2? I don't know. There may be a reason. I don't remember. But the thing is, unfortunately, unlike Shiny, which has Bootstrap, or NiceGUI, which has Quasar, Solara has no CSS utility framework to inject CSS classes into. So it requires a little bit more styling like Dash. But otherwise, layout code and components very similar to NiceGUI and Shiny. So let's dive into the reactivity. Here's my greeting row with my input text and my markdown. Now we define reactive values in state at the top of the script. Each reactive object here, from the name to selected period to selected content type, has a value attribute to get the current value and a set method to set a new value. Like in Shiny, if I use a reactive value in a component, like the markdown part in this greeting row, which is this hello dsdsdsd, whenever this name value changes, for example, because in this input text, when I change the value to Tiffany, blah, 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 this runs the onValue callback, which sets Faniki to this name set and changes the name reactive value. Then this name value changes and re-renders this markdown. As such, if I put I like apples, this changes the name value and re-renders the markdown here to hello, I like apples. And as you can guess, I love it. It's the same for filter rows, where I use selected period and selected content types reactive variables, and I've got a specific callbacks for them to set the reactive value of selected period and Plotly figure, and this is going to update this figure Plotly, because this figure Plotly depends on the Plotly figure. So here, if I change the movie, it updates the Plotly figure value, and so the figure Plotly updates. And same thing for the data frame, it depends on period, content types, and titles from the Plotly selection. And just like Shiny, this figure Plotly has an onSelection and onDeselect callback, which changes the reactive selected titles, which will update the Plotly figure when you select a new thing here. I don't know why though, it felt way easier to build this reactivity in Solara rather than in Shiny. It felt like Plotly ipywidget was really integrated here. So bonus point for Solara. If you implemented React frontends in your life, Solara is the closest I found to React in Python. And there's even React hooks like useMemo or useState that you can use in Solara. You'll feel right at home. my feeling right now is Solara is to ipywidgets what Dash is to Plotly. If I had more experience with ipywidgets or any widget, I'd use Solara more. So if you're an ipywidget fan, I think 100% go into Solara, or to a certain extent Shiny too. And by the way, try app.cafe if you want to share your Shiny, Solara, Streamlit, or Dash apps to the world. Do you remember that NiceGUI had a global state variable that you can inject in components? Well, this next dashboard has the same concept of a reactive state that re-renders components on update. At this point in the video, I hope you've realized all of those frameworks, they look the same and they kind of act the same. So, you know, as always, let's enter my name. My name is Fanilo lo. Woo! I'm tired. Set the period to change it very smooth, very seamless. And then there's a data frame and a plotly. You can filter the data frame with, this is not from me, this is a native keyboard search. We can filter, it's paginated. And then I also implemented the box selection like this, and it filters to only show like 10 data points. Kung Fu Panda 3. I should rewatch this trilogy. Yeah, we don't care. Plotly selection works very well. There's a little quirk I will talk about later that is solved by yet another React best practice. People always ask me to check Reflex in the comments, but do you know I have been following Reflex since the days they've been called Pinecone? That was years ago. But now that their documentation is way easier to read, it has become one of my favorite code syntax for building web apps in Python. Here's your main index, which is a container containing a vertical stacking of title, greeting, filter, card rows, chart row, preview rows with a spacing of 6, and a margin top of 4. So here, 6 pixels, 6 pixels, 6 pixels, 6 pixels, 6 pixels. And you noticed I put a margin top 4 Tailwind class because Reflex has Tailwind CSS. Yeah, you know at this point I love Tailwind, so bonus points again. Each of those rows, like greeting row, is a functional component, rendering a Reflex component. So here's a label, enter name. Oh, this is a harder component. This is your enter name label as span, your input box, both into a column, this flex column here, and this greeting output here, greeting output. In your components, you're seeing those state.name and state.setName. It does look a little like Solara or NiceGUI, in which you define your Python reactive variables inside this global state. Your name, selected period, selected content type. There should be no Python processing in any of those Reflex components because those here, everything here is converted into pure React or Next.js code. So no Python available here. Every Python processing should be in this state class. And because this is a class, you can compute derived properties like this greeting is a variable that uses the state name to render the hello vanille name or enter your name if the name is empty. Now I can use this greeting inside the component for the greeting. Let me here you've got your greeting out, which is this part here. It uses the derived property of greeting, which depends on the value of the name, which is set from the text box here, so this set name variable. Like Solara, this set name changes the name, which changes the greeting variable, which re-renders the greeting output into a dragon. We do the same for selected period and selected content type, where you've got the count number of elements, count number of views, or count of hours watched that depend on the selected period and selected content type values. So when I change them, those components are automatically re-rendered because they depend on the selected periods parts. Because this is decorated with rxvar, those are considered computed properties that re-render the component when they change because of their inputs. And then you've got your callbacks. They're decorated with rx events, and they're only called from components callback. Like, let me go to, yeah, this one, on this period select. So this is, wait a minute, this drop down here is defined at this level. So you've got your select drop down, and when the select drop down changes, I call a specific selected period callback. And what this callback does is, when I go to it, I change the state, the value of selected period to the value of the drop down that comes from the drop down. I set the selected titles to an empty array, and I rebuilt the plotly figure. And this plotly figure is actually this state here. There's a figure value which contains the state of the plotly figure. So this plot velocity plotly creates a new figure. It becomes the new state for the figure states. And because the figure state has changed, this will trigger the re-rendering of the plotly chart, because here the plotly depends on state figure. Phew. And finally, when I select points on this plotly figure, I call plotly selection callback, and this selection callback changes the selected title's reactive state, which will then change the data preview. Here, the data table preview, because the state uses the compute data preview state derived property. Yeah, this state derived property. Yes, this is going very fast. I forgot to tell you about this quirky React thing. In React, when there's too many event selection or too many keyboard pressed, in React you can select to throttle or debounce, which means if you're pressing on your keyboard a lot of time, if you're using the debouncing, you'll be only using the last event, and if you're throttling, you're using the first event. Here, because I don't know why the select event is fired 2 times, and the second event is fired as an empty event. So I can use this throttle of 500 milliseconds, which means if there's multiple events in 500 milliseconds delay, only fire the first event. A very React feature. If you worked with any of those full stack JavaScript libraries like Next.js, Nuxt.js, SvelteKit, Angular, I don't remember which one is for Angular, but anyway, and if you need an additional Python backend to source state back into those front-end libraries without having to define too much proxying configuration in Vite, I'm slowly beginning to shift into maybe consider Reflex. In the years I've tested Reflex, right now is the easiest time to learn it. And you get to embed your own React components. There's authentication, there's AG grade, there's SQL module as an ORM. And because they're currently pushing their AI builder and the cloud deploy, it really looks like they're trying to become the Vercel of the Python world. Now let's jump to Streamlit. As always, we do the test, enter Fanil. I do have to explicitly submit my update here if I'm not using a custom component. And if I change the period, the plotly chart stays. There's a little pop-in, but it's nice, it's fancy, it's okay. Plotly selection works well. If I select here, I get my filtered data frame. If I deselect, I get my full scrollable data frame. Hey, it works well. I'm at a point where if you want to learn how to build this Streamlit, you have 70 videos about Streamlit to look into. But, for the new people here, subscribe to the channel, and here's a quick breakdown of the Streamlit code. Just like everyone else, I've got my app, which consists of a stacking of containers and columns, this title row, greeting row, filters row, card row, with the scale being defined for st columns as 2 and 1 for this twice and once, or otherwise you're using those flexbox container here. After 6 libraries where you could define your own CSS or inject CSS class names, Streamlit is absolutely more opinionated. You cannot fix your own gap dimensions, like here it's medium, there's no 8 pixels. You cannot really put your inline CSS. I mean, now you can inject class names. Let me go further down. If you're using a key of name here, then you can actually access the CSS class name. It's called st key name here. But because it's linked to a key that is being used to uniquely identify a widget, it kind of goes against usual CSS naming convention, because you cannot put a key of red and red and red in multiple widgets. Okay, if we're doing intermediate Streamlit immediately, like in Shiny, every component state is accessible from the st session state variable. For example, I put a key of name on this text input, which is this enter name here, enter name text input, and the value of this text input, fenil, is available inside st session state name. So you can reuse this to compute the value of the markdown that you're going to display. And then same thing for this filter rows. There are select box with the key of selected period and a radio with a key of selected content type that you can access in this card. Here's the title of my card, and here's my get number of elements or get number of views depending on the session state, selected period, or selected content type that come from this drop down period and this radio type select type. And again, going against all previous frameworks, any interaction here, like clicking on this button, this will rerun the Streamlit script from top to bottom. So if you're changing this period, you're not only re-rendering this metric that depends on this period. No, you're re-rendering everything. I guess that's what makes Streamlit special. It's easy to quickly build Streamlit demos that don't have too much non-linear updates, like this should only update this plotly and not this card. That's okay. But if you're building bigger apps where you need to link this to this and this to this, Streamlit may hurt you in the long run. If you're asking me which one is the easiest to develop with, Streamlit, no doubt. You don't have to think about callbacks, re-rendering, transparent reactivity, CSS. It's like a Python script that loops from top to bottom every time. Sure, it's less flexible, it's less reactive, but if it gets the job done for internal tooling to customer data exports, then I'm happy. And I say that having seen consulting companies sell Streamlit apps for $50K. So don't put too much attention on those LinkedIn posts that say, don't use Streamlit because it's not flexible enough. Just get the job done. But Fenil, if Streamlit is not at the top of your ranking, then who is? Well, this one is snappy. Fenil, provide a name and submit. Hello Fenil. Change the period, changes immediately. Change the show, changes immediately. Go and select some data points, and you've got your filtered values, and you can sort immediately. Works really well, super reactive, And this was the second fastest app I wrote after Solara. If you have all of your functions defined to compute plots and KPIs, it is very easy to bind them to widgets when you're working with Panel. Code breakdown. As always, we got a global app in a flexbox with a title row, grid row, filter rows, nya. Go on this grid row, we have a flexbox of a name input and a greeting output. My name input being a panel text input with a name and placeholder, and my greeting output being an HTML. You have styling layout arguments like this gap for rem or this align items to the end, but you also got inline styling like font size or font weight or flexbox 1 and with a font size of 1.2 rem. While writing this panel code, I do find myself thinking that writing panel layout is a little like writing dash layout. It's maybe a tiny little too low level for me. But that's maybe because after Shiny with Bootstrap, Reflex with Tailwind, and NiceGUI with Quasar, maybe it's the lack of CSS utility classes that I think I need to restyle everything. I know Panel now has a Panel Material UI component library, so maybe give this a go for a better looking thing than this gray Gradio thing. The greeting output HTML value is a reactive greeting value, which is here is a binding between the value of the name input widget being sent to the greet name callback. So here the name input becomes this argument here of greet name, and it returns hello vanilla or provide a name. And now every time I change this variable here, the widget's input variable, then this will call the greet name function, which will store its result into greeting rx, and this will re-render the greeting output whenever it changes. There are other ways to express reactivity, like for example, you can use panel reacts to create a reactive variable from a previously reactive variable, or you can even, this selected content type is this widget here, which is a reactive widget. You can call rx on it to get the reactive value and immediately work on it. And because this is reactive, it will re-render this panel HTML whenever this rx changes. My preferred way of explaining it right now is I'm binding input widgets to functions, and those functions will output into a reactive expression that I can reuse to re-render any widget outputs. Surprisingly enough, Panel was the easiest for me to bind the plotly chart. This plotly chart selected data, I bind it into a plotly selection callback, which returns a set of selected titles, and those selected titles become this reactive expression, selected titles, which I reuse in the compute data preview here. Selected titles here, selected titles will re-render this data preview rx, which will re-render the data frame at the end. So here, if I select, I bind it to selected titles, which bind to the output of this data frame. And that was immediate. I think that's how I wanted Shiny or NiceGUI to work. I don't know why. They almost look the same, but with Panel, it was immediate. And I think just for that, Panel is first on my ranking. So Panel is first. Would I use Panel next time? Well, I don't know. I have a love and hate relationship with Panel, in which whenever I read their documentation, I feel done. Panel is the Python toolkit of McGyver. It feels like there's a tool for everything. For you have got Rx, you've got PN binding, you've got watch, you've got layout, template, tabulator. After 20 minutes of reading the documentation, I get overwhelmed. And I know they're working hard on their documentation. So I just hope I become more experienced with panel, that I'm able to quickly build dashboards with it. But when it clicks, like, panel hits the right trade-off between being the most reactive, like, look at this, it's so reactive, while being the simplest to set up. Like, you're just binding this widget to another widget through a function, and you can chain bindings like this, and it was so easy to reason about. So I don't know. One of my old coworkers uses Panel to power its own reactive dashboard enterprise library, and maybe that's it. You should use Panel as a set of low-level reactive primitives for bigger projects. Wow, did I go way too fast on each of those libraries? Well, let me know in the comments below if you want a deep dive code breakdown in one of those examples. I can do it in September after my holidays. I will see you around. Bye!